A tiny Midwestern town in for the shock of its life.
I would describe the attack on Miss Iverson as an example of extreme violence and assault.
A horror movie scenario, and the enemy is lurking.
It is an up-close and personal type crime, and it's indicative that the person who committed the crime knows the victim.
With a killer at large, detectives have to act fast.
It was evident that we had a very violent individual who did not have any respect for life. And that's a very uneasy feeling, especially in a small community.
Black River Falls, Wisconsin, an all-American town. Tucked between the tall pines of central Wisconsin and the mighty Black River.
The majority of the people working in Jackson County, I would say, are blue collar. A lot of farming, cranberry growers, and Christmas tree growers.
And the folks here are known for being very close-knit.
Individuals pass each other on the street saying hello and how their day is going because everybody kind of knows each other. They look out for each other.
But even in a place like this, crime can come knocking. In August of 2002, law enforcement would find themselves neck-deep in a murder mystery. A mystery that would put them on the bloody trail of a killer next door.
7645, code 6.
One summer morning, detectives from the Jackson County Sheriff's Office are called to the home of 36-year-old Sandra Iverson.
Morning, gentlemen. Hey, JC. Thanks for coming. How you feeling?
After not reporting for work, one of Sandy Iverson's co-workers went to her residence, noted her vehicle in the driveway, and what appeared to be a blood stain on the front door of her residence.
But the stain on the door is just a preview of the bloodbath inside.
Right here, guys, is where I found her.
Sandy's throat had been sliced. Danny, look at the blood spatter over there on the right. And you could see blood spatter, which emitted from her throat area, indicating that at the time her throat was sliced, she was still alive and her heart was still pumping. Does that look like some blunt force?
What kind of person could carry out such an atrocious attack?
It is an up-close and personal type crime or homicide, and as a result, there is generally a lot of passion or rage, and it's indicative that the person who committed the crime knows the victim.
But it's hard to imagine anyone in town wanting to harm this popular young woman.
Sandy Iverson was a very pleasant person. I knew her and have talked to her. I think anybody who knew Sandy liked her.
With one very obvious exception. Detectives believe there's a killer lurking among them. And suddenly, everyone in Black River Falls is watching their back.
It was evident that we had a very violent individual who did not have any respect for life. And that's a very uneasy feeling, especially in a small community.
After Sandra Iverson's body is sent to the morgue for autopsy, a crime scene unit scours her home for clues.
Crime analysts will look for other indications that may have been left behind by the assailant, such as hairs, fibers, footprints, clothing, anything of that nature.
But the killer seems to have come and gone without a trace.
The trailer was in very good shape. There was no disarray to indicate that there had been any kind of severe struggle in any other part of the trailer other than in the bedroom area where the body was located.
But then investigators look outside.
Got a little bit of a blood trail coming out here. We've got some significant blood here. So what we've got it marked and taking some photographs here.
The crime lab personnel were able to blood track out of the trailer and out to the driveway area where the victim's vehicle was located.
A trail of bloody footprints. Could it lead them to the killer?
So our suspect looks like he came out this way, maybe headed even into the woods, so we're going to do a search into the woods.
The footprints led out of the residence, down the driveway, and eventually to the road, going in the direction of a wooded area.
We had the sheriff's department contact one of their canine units to come out and actually go into the woods and track and see if there's anything that we could locate out there.
One of the dogs quickly picks up a scent. He leads his handler to a pile of leaves right behind Iverson's home.
Looks like we got something over here.
The dogs came upon some evidence.
You want to take a picture?
Which included Sandy's purse. And in that purse was her identification, a pair of wind pants that was soaked in blood, and a knife blade without the handle present.
Our anticipation was we'd be able to get DNA evidence from the purse or the contents of the purse.
While the evidence is sent to the crime lab for analysis, detectives take to the streets.
So now we need to take a look at individuals in the area and do a neighborhood canvass to see if they saw or heard anything on the night that Sandy was killed.
And that's when officers find out about Sandy's on-again, off-again boyfriend, Ben Richardson.
Some investigation? You got a few minutes that I can talk to you?
The relationship appeared to be somewhat contentious because both had done things to possibly make the other one jealous.
Neighbors report that lately, Iverson and Richardson had been fighting loud enough for the whole neighborhood to hear.
The fact that they'd had these past arguments led us to look at him as number one, somebody that we needed to talk to and find right away.
Black River Falls, Wisconsin, Sandra Iverson has been cut down in her own home. And detectives have followed a bloody trail into the woods nearby. Now they're trying to find out who left that trail, and they've honed in on Sandra's boyfriend, Ben Richardson.
Sandy and her boyfriend at the time had an on-again, off-again relationship, and as a result of interviews that we had conducted, it seemed as if Sandy had a jealous streak.
Rumor has it the couple's arguments could even get violent. But violent enough to kill?
In a case like this, which is indicative of a crime of passion, generally you're looking at a husband, a boyfriend, a ex-lover, a co-worker that might have some feelings toward the victim.
Investigators bring Richardson into the station for questioning.
We wanted to find out where he was located at the time of the homicide.
But Iverson's boyfriend seems to have nothing to hide.
The demeanor of the boyfriend was, I'd say, concerned and helpful. Did not appear to have any problem talking about his relationship with Sandy.
Boyfriend, girlfriend, on and off. She was a little more into the marriage thing than I was.
And he claims he was 700 miles away when Sandra was stabbed to death.
Yeah, I was up in Sturgis at the bike rally.
We learned that he is a motorcycle enthusiast.
I go up there every year. Sometimes Sandy would come with me, sometimes not.
And every year does go to Sturgis, South Dakota for the annual motorcycle rally.
The three-day rally ended the very same day Iverson's body was found. Officers question a number of bikers who also attended the rally.
All of those individuals provided us the same alibi that he was in fact riding his motorcycle out to Sturgis, South Dakota at the time of her homicide.
The next day, investigators meet to go over the autopsy results.
I would describe the attack on Miss Iverson as an example of extreme violence and assault, going from blunt trauma to strangulation and ultimately to throat slashing.
But Iverson didn't go without a struggle. And as she fought back, she managed to catch some of her attacker's skin under her fingernails.
The fingernail scrapings that were taken from Sandy indicated a male DNA profile.
That very same profile shows up on the evidence found behind Iverson's home.
DNA was collected in the waistband and in the ankle bands of the wind pants, and there was no indication of Sandy's DNA in those areas, only of male DNA.
Find the donor, and investigators will have solved the crime. The autopsy reveals another crucial piece of evidence.
Hey, Mike. So I've taken a look at these films. I don't see anything particular.
In the Iverson case, I observed 2 bruises that have a specific pattern of parallel linear marks in a close approximation to themselves. This is the so-called tram track pattern that indicates application of a linear weapon, such as a bat, a tubular piece of metal, broomstick even.
A second possible murder weapon. It could be the key to finding the killer.
Did you have any inclination that any of the items inside Sandy's residence could have been used? No instrument of that nature was found at the crime scene.
Nothing that matched there at all.
Which made us believe that the assailant still had it in his or her possession.
By now, everyone in Black River Falls has their own theory about who killed Sandra Iverson. From a gang of violent bikers to a psychopathic serial killer, tips began to flow into the sheriff's department, and investigators do their best to follow up.
An individual came forward to us that one of Sandy's neighbors was singing a song in a bar that was very morbid and talked about stabbing and killing her.
Was it a sick joke or a veiled confession?
This particular individual has a past with law enforcement, and as a result, we wanted to continue to look at possibilities that he may be, in fact, the individual responsible for Sandy's death.
Their new suspect's name is Brad Thompson, and when investigators speak to his landlord, they become even more suspicious.
The landlord told us that at some point he had brandished a knife, stating that he could do a lot of damage with that knife. As a result of that information, our interest peak, our blood starts to flow again, and we think we now have another viable suspect in Sandy's death.
Detectives pay a visit to Thompson's home and question his wife.
The wife was shown a photograph of the wind pants, and she believed that her husband could in fact have possessed those wind pants.
The noose seems to be tightening around Thompson's neck, but when investigators go to confront him, they discover that their suspect vanished just days after the murder.
We learned that when he was in trouble with the law, it was not uncommon for him to flee to the state of Alaska.
Could Sandra Iverson's killer be on the run? Investigators in Black River Falls, Wisconsin, are searching for Sandra Iverson's killer. And when they discover that prime suspect Brad Thompson fled to Alaska just days after the murder, they're even more convinced they're on the right track.
We began to wonder if he had fled to take the pressure off of him, and again, to make the trail cold for us.
With Thompson out of reach, more than 4,000 miles away, detectives come up with a creative strategy for assessing his guilt.
Correct. And I just started... So we approached the parents and asked the parents for a DNA profile.
Their genetic codes won't match that of their son identically, but they should give technicians enough information to move the case forward.
By pulling the parents' DNA, we can definitively link family members together.
But just when it seems detectives are about to close the case, they get some shocking news from the lab.
Unfortunately, the DNA results from the parents proved that there was no link. At this point, it's strike three. There is a significant letdown, and we now need to figure out a different investigative avenue to pursue to bring the true suspect to light.
With the trail gone cold, investigators turn to the people of Black River Falls for help.
We went to the media and asked for their assistance. In this case, we asked them to provide a photograph of Sandy, a photograph of the wind pants, in an attempt to elicit information from the general public. Within days of the media release, the Sheriff's Department received numerous calls from individuals who identified the wind pants as a promotional gift as a result of redeeming points from Marlboro cigarettes. We sent Philip Morris a list of zip codes in this area, and in return, Philip Morris sent us a list of individuals within those zip codes that had received the wind pants. Christofferson calling from DCI. What we did was we went through that list and looked for addresses close to Sandy's address. And we decided we were going to start from the closest address and work our way out in an attempt to identify who owned those wind pants.
One person on the list is closer than anyone expected.
The first address we went to happened to be the next door neighbor of Sandy's. When we went to the residence, we learned that there was a mother with 2 children that resided at that residence.
Detectives showed the woman a picture of the wind pants.
Her daughter, who was homesick from school, walked by, looked at the photograph, and stated that those wind pants looked like the wind pants that her brother wears.
His name is Dustin Harwick, and he's just a 9th grader.
Immediately, our blood began to flow 100 times faster than it was, and we felt we were definitively on the right track.
Was Sandra Iverson butchered by her 14-year-old neighbor? Sandra Iverson has been murdered in her Black River Falls, Wisconsin home, and detectives now suspect that the wind pants left at the crime scene belonged to her neighbor, Dustin Harwick. Dustin Harwick may only be 14 years old, but he's 6 feet tall, 275 pounds, and a ton of trouble.
He'd had problems even in grade school. He had attacked like a middle school teacher. He had been fighting in 5th grade with students, all tending to think that he was a fairly violent individual even at a younger age.
But is he violent enough to commit murder? Detectives get a sample of Harwick's DNA. And for the 3rd time, they anxiously await the results. This time, they're finally in luck. Harwick's sample is a match.
When we received the DNA results from the crime laboratory, there was exhilaration in the office. And then at the same time, there was a little bit of sadness knowing that a 14-year-old had committed this crime.
After the suspect was identified, an arrest warrant was obtained, and we also got search warrants for the mother's house and his school locker.
In Dustin's room, they find weightlifting equipment.
The forensic pathologist indicated that the blunt force injuries were from a linear object, such as a pipe, possibly a baton or a flashlight.
Or even a weightlifting bar. As detectives are wrapping up, they notice one more chilling detail. Dustin's window looks right into the room where Sandra Iverson was murdered. Ninth grader Dustin Harwick is arrested for the murder of Sandra Iverson.
Dustin pled guilty to first-degree intentional homicide with the eligibility of parole after 30 years.
Investigators finally know who killed Sandra Iverson, but why she was killed remains a haunting mystery.
I think the community is always looking for that answer as to why Sandy died this horrific, brutal death by the hands of then Dustin was 14 years old, and what would drive somebody that young to commit such a horrific act.
Personally, this was a weight off the community of Black River Falls, and knowing that I assisted in doing that and bringing a conclusion to Sandy's family so that they can now rest and she can rest in peace, no words can describe how that feels.